Yes, welcome everybody to the first talk of the Nightlight Astrology Spring Speaker Series. My name is Michelle Courbezier, and I'm one of Adam's teaching assistants. Before I introduce today's guest, I would like to say a few words about the Nightlight Speaker Series, and if this is the first time that you're joining us, and please allow me to share my screen for a moment. There we go. That should be visible. And yeah, for over 10 years now, the Nightlight Astrology has been hosting these speaker series. We have three speaker series per season, or three talks per season. And please go to the website nightlightastrology.com, click on the events button here, and you will notice that we have a section speaker series. Check this a couple of times a year. You will always see the current lineup. And if you want to get the announcements directly actually into your inbox, you can always subscribe to the Nightlight Astrology mailing list. You will find a button at the bottom of this page. And the purpose of these speaker series, Nightlight Talks, is to introduce students of Nightlight Astrology to different topics, different perspectives, in addition to the regular curriculum of the Nightlight courses. And we also want to make high quality astrological education publicly available. And thanks to the support of everybody who contributed to the Kickstarter campaign in December, we are able to offer these presentations completely free. So I want to give a big warm thanks to everybody who has contributed. This will be the first talk in this spring series, and we will post the replay here tomorrow. You will see this button that says register now. It will change into a watch replay button tomorrow. And today our guest, Elodie, is going to talk about the very early history of astrology. And so let me just read Elodie's biography. So Elodie Saint-Onge is a French-Canadian astrologer born on the east coast of Quebec and currently living on the island of Newfoundland. Elodie writes a monthly horoscope for Astrograph, has a thriving consultation and teaching practice, and is involved in astrological research. And you can reach her at ninthhouseastrology.com, and we will take a look at that a little later after the talk. All right, so before we get started, finally, allow me to say a couple of words about the logistics of this webinar. The chat box has been set so that our guest and I will be able to read your comments, but they won't be publicly visible, just in order to avoid distractions. And we'll make time for a Q&A at the end of the talk. So I encourage you all to post your questions if you have any. Post them into the Q&A box. You will find a button Q&A at the bottom of your screen, and we'll go over your questions at the end of the presentation. All right, so that's it for me, and now I'll let Elodie talk. Please take it away.
So, hi everybody, thank you for being here. Thanks for having me. I'm going to share my screen, I believe. Correct?
Yes. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So I don't think I will be able to read the comments because I will be in lecture mode of this presentation. So I'm not sure if I can see the comments while I have this screen share.
That's okay, Elodie. We'll keep that for at the end of the session. We'll just go over questions and comments later. No problem.
Perfect. Okay. So let me just take a moment. I want to thank Adam. He's not here, but I want to thank Adam. I was Adam's first year student in 2013. I studied with him. We were a very small class of maybe 7 or 8 people. So it's interesting that I come 10 years later to the school to speak, and I just wanted to take a moment to thank him and his support through the years, because his contribution to the astrology community is very important, and he's given me a lot of opportunity throughout the years, various opportunities. So I'm very grateful for his work and his contribution and the support. He invites everybody at his table, and I think that's a really important thing, just to form community. So I really appreciate that. And yeah, I was a student of Adam from 2013 to 2017, I think. And when he first started the Nightlight Astrology School, like I said, we were maybe 7. And after a year, he created this student clinic where people who could not afford readings would come to us by donation. And so I spent like a whole year practicing through this student clinic practicing consultation. And so, yeah, it really sharpened my skill. And that's thanks to him and everything he had put in place. So about this lecture today, this lecture is a variation that I've been working on for a few years that came through reading on the history of astrology. And I presented a similar lecture in 2019 on the very early history of astrology. And so this is a work in progress that keeps shaping itself. I'm not an archeo-astronomer. I'm not Paleolithic specialist. This is more of a personal passion and interest in archaeology and ancient history. But I'm a full-time astrologer, so just to specify that I don't have I'm not a specialized anthropologist historian. This is very much just a passion of mine. So let's see if I can, I don't know if I can, there you go. So this lecture I divided in 3 parts. The first part, I'm gonna rant for a little bit. I want us to think about what it is that we do as astrologer or as a student of astrology. So I want to contextualize a little bit more of just what is actually astrology, the words that we use. And I'll spend quite a bit of time just ranting. And after I'm done, then we can move to the second part, which is the exciting one. We're going to look at different artifacts, different sites, and speculate maybe a little bit about what it is that ancient people were doing. But the whole point of this lecture is just to take us away from the Hellenistic period, which we kind of use as a origin point. It's, obviously there's a good revival. It's important. It's very valuable. But I want to stretch that much further and kind of, highlight the fact that astrology is a fundamental part of human experience, of how culture has evolved, and that predates, the written record that we have on astrology by thousands and thousands and thousands of years. So, but the second part will be just a loose exploration of bone fragments, calendars, cave paintings, and all that. So it's not going to be so mental, heady. And then the third part, I think I'm going to open the conversation with people, and we can reflect maybe a little bit further about what it is that we do now in modern time, and where is astrology heading as we experience this virtual shift. And yeah, so that's sort of the way I'm going to go about it. I'm not sure how long it's going to take. So this image is kind of it. One of the reasons I started this lecture in the first place is because as astrology enthusiasts, as an astrologer, as a student of astrology, we are all confronted to people telling us, wow, you believe in astrology? And I think that's more of a dialectical issue than actually a real issue. I think people that don't know the language of astrology or the art or the interpretive role of astrology don't realize that actually astrology is just a way of contextualizing experience. It's a relationship with light and with time. So I just found this random image online. You know, American spends around 100 million on astrology. Are they being superstitious or are they being scientific? And what if it's neither or? You know, what if it's something that humans always have done? So this is why I kind of started framing this whole concept of really moving back in time, looking at what humans have been doing and wanting to educate the public really about, you know, how much experiencing light and experiencing the cycle and the season is just a fundamental part of our experience on Earth. So it's not something that's, you know, separate really. And also I think as astrologers or astrology students, it's important to take our what it is that we do further than just doing it, just the practice and having the techniques. That's beautiful, that's important. But I think that we need to be able to explain, especially to skeptic, this is maybe my own sort of soapbox, but I think it's important to explain philosophically that it's not actually separate from our experience and that it's a very fundamental human experience. The major inspiration for this lecture came from this book from Nicholas Campion, The History of Western Astrology, Volume 1. When I read this book, I realized a lot of things. It was really fascinating. It goes all the way to just after the Hellenistic era. So it begins, you know, 200,000 years ago, and then he moves forward in time. So there's 2 volumes, and the second volume is starting with the Christian world and so on. But this book, when I read this book, I was really blown away by just the depth at which we have been doing astrology forever. And so that was a big inspiration for this lecture and for this research. Nicholas Campion, I believe he's still president of the Sophia Center, which is, and maybe some of you here actually attend this center, but it is more of the academic setting for doing astrology. So we use the word cultural astronomy. So yeah, it was this book also that exposed me to the work of Alexander Marshak, which was a major inspiration for this lecture and research. So for those of you who do not know Alexander Marshak, he was an independent researcher in the 60s. He was a journalist, and I think he was hired to do research on how did we evolve to walk on the moon. And so he started moving back in time, and then he came across these bone fragments in French museum of just with weird, strange dots. And he started to question what are those markings, and that's how he theorized that a lot of the bone fragments that were sitting in museum from the Paleolithic era were actually calendars. And I'm going to return to this later, but I just wanted to introduce a little bit how my train of thought of how I got to doing this research in the first place. So Alexander Marshak is still very controversial in the scientific community with his supposition that all of these bone fragments from Paleolithic era are actually lunar calendar, and that ancient people were actually aware and counting the lunar cycles. So this is still not completely accepted. It's controversial. But I think even since last time I did this presentation 2 years ago, as I was updating this lecture, there's more and more information surfacing. So I think the history, our past, and that whole period as we progress with technology and research, and I think there's a lot more acceptance that Paleolithic people, ancient people, were already very educated in star motion. Another important inspiration for this research is Chantal Jegg, and I cannot pronounce her family name. Chantal Jegg Wokiwez. So she continues the work of Alexander Marshak. She's currently in France. And so she took what Alexander Marshak started doing with the lunar calendar and the research and really took it a notch further. She wrote many, many books. These 2 books here, they're unfortunately only in French, but it's very fascinating. She theorized that the people of the Lascaux caves, that era, the Cro-Magnon, from 30,000 years ago, the Homo sapiens were already doing basically very complex astronomy. And so her work, she spent many years in these caves and studying the tools and using ancient tools, recreating them and speculating on what it is. And I'm going to revisit that, but I just wanted to introduce her work because if you do your research on your own, if you're interested in learning more about this period of astrology, you're going to come across her work because she's one of the biggest contributor in modern time right now. So first of all, let's just establish what is astrology. Because I think that's a point of contention even between us practitioners. We cannot agree if astrology is divinatory, if it's a language. So very fundamentally, astrology is the observation and interpretation of planets, and more specifically, planetary motion, from a geocentric perspective, and how these correlate with events on Earth and in our lives. I think we can agree on that. It's very, very basic definition of astrology. So the study of the movement and position of the sun, moon, planets, and stars, and how they would affect affairs on Earth. Over time, the study of planetary motion and cycle became very complex. And we can see today, we have here on the right, this is Time Nomad software. So from the very early beginning to now, we can see how much astrology has become this very, very complex language. And I just had an example of how over time we evolve with astrology. Let's take the transit of Pluto. Pluto is a planet that's only been discovered not very long ago, 1930s. So we actually have no written record of what it means for Pluto to be in Aquarius, but we can speculate and we can sit on the knowledge of our predecessor to speculate, okay, Pluto is about to enter Aquarius. What does that entail? But we actually have no written record of Pluto entering Aquarius because Pluto has only been discovered in 1930. So you can see this is how the knowledge of astrology slowly layers and becomes more and more and more complex. And we can add all of the asteroids and everything else. And there's a lot of work. But one of the essential components of doing astrology is not relying on the textual evidence. Yes, I think that understanding the theory and the basic is absolutely fundamental, But a big part of astrology, essential part of astrology, is actually observation and experience. And I think this is a question that I'm going to keep bringing up, because as we move through the virtual world and astrological delineation that are given to us through artificial intelligence or online, more and more we are separating from the observational and the experiential and moving into the very conceptual. So I want to this is something I'm going to keep bringing back, just because I think it's important if you practice astrology to, yes, know your theory, understand the basic function, but it's also important to observe. And I think that's a fundamental part of astrology. So the evolution of astrology that we use today has its humble beginning in our deep past, and that's rarely acknowledged. So the written tradition that comes from the Hellenistic period is known to be a compendium, as opposed to having arisen at that time. It is even the author, the Hellenistic author of 2000 years ago, speak of mysterious origin, of astrology being much older. So we don't have written records before Mesopotamia, but all of the written records, the first written records we have from Egypt and from the Greek period, are actually compendium. They're compilation of observation that already existed. So where does that come from? The written tradition that we have inherited is not the true astrology, and I think sometimes we get swayed by the Hellenistic period and the texts and the textual evidence and rely on it a little bit too much, because it doesn't stop there. And it's far from being the true astrology, but it's simply a small marker in a much, much, much longer history that has its roots potentially 50,000 years ago. And this is what I'm going to demonstrate today. So again, I'm bringing this question again because this is also, like I said at the beginning, a sort of philosophical take on what it is that we're doing now as modern astrologer. So the modern practice of astrology is so far removed from the observational, and as an astrologer who write on this Instagram and social media, you know, I participate in this, but sometimes I wonder if people are so far removed from the intuition that they're going to have a bad day because an astrologer on Instagram or social media said it's supposed to be a bad day. And so that can get problematic. I think it is problematic. I've met a lot of people in consultation that are disconnected from their intuition in a way, but still indulging in astrology. And so that's, again, something that I'm just bringing up because I think this is a sort of modern issue. So you might be like, yeah, we have written records of the Mesopotamian period. So how can we possibly know if astrology was practiced during the Paleolithic era? And is it relevant to us even, you know? So in that sense, I would say go outside and experience nature. And this is why this is a little bit of my rant here. I think we are so separated from the actual experience of the light and darkness in our modern practice. And I want us to, as astrologer or as student of astrology, be able to reintegrate that a little bit more and reintegrate the somatic experience of light and darkness to understand what it is that we do. The other issue is an issue of light, because it is only 200 years that we have electricity. In the history of human, That's not very long. That's not a very long time. Yes, I'm just, okay, so astrology is a science of light. And now we are doing astrology on screens. We have electricity 24/7. We can grow food 365 days of the year, and we can grow animal in laboratories. So then what becomes of astrology if it's not an experience of the sun rising or setting? And again, just speaking of modern astrology and how it is practiced online, and I promise I'm almost done with this. I think the danger is that it becomes a little bit of egregores. And egregores is just when a lot of people are thinking the same thing at the same time, and it becomes a sort of thought form. So let's say I wake up in the morning and I go on my phone and everybody's talking about Pluto in Aquarius and the end of the world, or the coming of the AI and how everything is collapsing. That creates a lot of anxiety. I'm an astrologer. I have the ability to contextualize in a bigger cycle and understand that we are in the air period and all of this. But for most people who consume astrology, they're missing the bigger context. They're missing the understanding of the language of astrology. And I think we're doing a lot of damage to the practice by creating this sort of egregores. And so we see this sort of foaming, this sort of bubbling of like, okay, Mercury's retrograde, and it just completely becomes this thing, and people are completely disconnected from their intuition. And then if you're disconnected from your intuition, you're disconnected from your body. So I'm not saying, I don't have a conclusion. I'm not saying it's good or bad, but I'm just saying this is a symptomatic of being less and less in our bodies, more and more in the virtual world. And so I would invite people to return to a somatic experience of light and darkness. This was my rant. Okay, so for those of you who don't know, Jyotish, which is the Vedic form of astrology, translate as the science of light. So again, we could argue that astrology expresses the basic relationship we have as human with nature and the natural phenomenon around us, and more specifically, light. And light's going to express differently depending on where you are on Earth. And it's going to express differently depending on the day and depending on the time of year, which we could say this is basically astrology. But there's not one astrology, there's many astrology, because light is going to be different. For example, where I am here in Newfoundland, we are going to experience 2 months of fog and rain. Meanwhile, somebody in South Africa, somebody in Australia right now, are experiencing completely different weather. So does the same astrology applies for me? And what is the meaning of spring? For me, the spring equinox tomorrow and the return of the light for me in one of the most gray place in North America versus somebody who lives in Australia right now. But fundamentally, I think for all of human history, the light of the sun dictate our whole experience here on Earth. So night and day, the seasons, the animal migration, agriculture, our own circadian cycle, sleep and waking. Very, very simple. So when I speak of these things, can you notice how these basic concepts resonate within you, a human living in 2023? We are mostly now pretty far removed from these processes. Of course, we see the sun, we experience it. But like I said earlier, we have access to food that grow. I have access to food here on an island in the North Atlantic that comes from South America. So all of these cycle of light and darkness that dictated human experience forever are not applicable anymore. Is that a good thing, a bad thing? I'm not sure, but it is a thing that's happening. And we take electricity for granted, but electricity only has been around for 200 years. Speaking this again, because humans in 200-300 years from now are probably not going to be the same kind of humans that were always here. I think the blue light that we have from our screens all the time is changing our sleep pattern, it's changing our mood, it's changing our behavior. And I think we are in the process of changing biologically because of electricity. And it's only 200 years of light like this. Yes, of course, humans have had candles and light their night for a very long time, but not to the extent that we have now. So our whole relationship with light is changing in a really, really significant way, in a way that is changing our human experience, and in a way that will be changing our astrology. Because if astrology is our interaction with light, and light is changing, what's the implication? So I just made this little diagram here. The first electric pole that was installed in London in 1878. And now 2023, who doesn't look at a phone? Not many people. So it's the first time in human history that our eyes are exposed to artificial light and blue light in such a way that it's impacting our health, our bodies. So I want us to think about that again, because at the end of the presentation, I want to brainstorm and I want to hear what people think about the role of light now in modern day, and the role of light and the role of astrology in modern day. Rant over. Now is the good part. Okay, so what is archeo-astronomy? So our archeo-astronomy and ethno-astronomy, also referred jointly as cultural astronomy, are concerned with humankind's perception and understanding of astronomical phenomena throughout human history and among culture. And if you see in the title, I scratched astronomy and put astrology because I think it's one and the same. But obviously for academia, for astrology to be able to move through the filters of science, we need to use other words than astrology. So in not so many words, we could say that the cultural astronomy is the academic term used to speak of the history of astrology and more broadly astrology. Because a pure scientific approach brings a lot of challenge if you're going to start studying the artifacts of cultures, because it was not purely astronomical observation, and we know that. And so we have to invent words to replace the word that people were doing astrology and replace it with fancy words that will fit the established institution. As usual, the scientific filters and methods that we use cannot bring themselves to include the idea that people and culture throughout time practice and evolve through contextualizing their experience with astrology. So this is a fundamental thing humans have always done. Now we do it on Instagram, we do it on Facebook, we do it on YouTube, but humans have always contextualized their experience through astrology in various ways. So the recurring problem of astrology being the black sheep or the rejected child of the scientific mind is an interesting parallel for the denaturalization of the world and the technological advancement that we that also contribute to the loss of nature and her natural rhythm as we push to control every aspect of existence through calculation, as opposed to a more embodied and experiential understanding. I hope that makes sense. Now is the good part. We're gonna start looking at some artifacts, and I'm gonna take you on a little tour. This is a very loose exploration of different artifacts, and I'm gonna start chronologically from as far as possible, and I'm gonna move all the way to Egypt, and I'm gonna stop there because we have a lot of information about Egypt and Greek astrology. So one thing to keep in mind, and I just wanted to specify for those of you who don't know, there's kind of two ways of calculating the lunar cycle. This is going to be important because we're going to see a lot of people looking at lunar cycle a long time ago. So there's two different ways. It takes 27 days and a half for the moon to complete one full orbit around Earth. That's called a sidereal month, and it's measured by the moon's position relative to the stars, fixed stars. So that's called a sidereal period. But the moon takes about 29.5 days to complete one cycle phase. So from one new moon to one new moon, and that's called a synodic period. A lot of culture approximates to 28 days. But this is relevant because we're going to start seeing a lot of these numbers, 28, 29, 27. This here is the oldest artifact that I could find. But like I said, the research is always evolving, always changing. And so there's always new information coming in. And what I've noticed also is that the dates of the artifact keeps continuously being pushed further and further. So this is the oldest artifact. It's the earliest bone fragment recovered in Germany from an elephant tibia that was carved around between 350,000 years ago and 250,000 years ago. So we're not talking about the Hellenistic era anymore. We're way beyond. So on this bone fragment, it appears that there's 28 notches, 2 groups of 7, and 14 incised parallels, which is suggestive of the days in a sidereal lunar month, the time it takes for the moon to return to the same set of stars. This would have been created by the Homo erectus, which is not even our ancestors, supposedly. So it's very old. This is possibly a very early calendar and the demonstration of early humans empirically connecting with the moon. But speculation, we don't have written record, we don't know. We don't have a time machine. But these bones, we're going to continue seeing them. And there is a lot of them. There's a huge gap of evidence from that period, and then it goes to Neanderthal. Neanderthal were burying their dead facing the east-west. So again, we see that there might have been a solar connection, a solar ritual, but again, not too many proofs. 43,000 years ago, this is a bone from a baboon tibia that comes from South Africa and contains 29 notches, suggesting it may have been a counter device for a synodic month from new moon to new moon. Again, speculation. This is a lot of the work that Alexander Marshak did And then there's many people working on these things now, but this was first brought to light by Alexander Marshak. We have this bone here discovered in East Africa, dated to about 30,000 years ago. It was discovered in 1957. It's the bone of a baboon again. Alexander Marshak first proposed that it was a lunar calendar. But again, you know, highly contested. But we can see there's groupings here. And scientists speculate that it was just a tally. It was just a way of keeping track of something. Even before that, they thought maybe this was just decoration. People were bored and they were just making a little scratch on bones. So 35,000 years ago, this is one of the most famous examples. You've probably seen it before. It was found in France in the caves. It's called, I guess, the Blanchard shelter. And Marshak speculated that this is a lunar cycle calculation. And Chantal Jegg, the French researcher, speculates that this is actually two lunar cycle. It seems pretty obvious to me when I look at it that it seems like a lunar cycle, but again, it's very controversial in the scientific world. Let's move here. Another example from a similar region. I have approximate dates here because these dates, they're highly controversial. Again, like the dating, it goes up from 30,000, 25,000 years ago. This is the Lartet bone. This is an old discovery. I think it was discovered in the 1800s and it was just put in a drawer. And similar marking as the lunar one. Sorry, the Abri Blanchard one, this one. And this here is the work of Chantal Jegg. And she speculates that it represents cycles from new moon to new moon for a 2-year period. I'm not going extensively through these artifacts, but if you're interested in research this, you're gonna find a whole world. So we find similar sort of pattern here. This was found in Siberia, dated from 23,000 to 19,000 years ago. So more example of tally. Scientists in general just speculated that this is simply a way to keep track of or counting, but there's something very circular about it, and the numbers on these fragments seem to be speaking of something a little bit more complex. This was also recovered in Siberia. I think it was recovered in like 1930. And on one side of the plate, we can see that there's 3 snakes. The snake is very rare in Siberia. So presumably the cold condition, you know, there was no snakes there, but that looks like a cobra. So maybe potentially this is something that was, you know, cultural calendars that were being transported from one place to the next. When I look at this personally, it makes me think if this is some kind of calendar, potentially something related to eclipses, because we see that a lot with ancient culture also. And I'm not speaking of eclipse today because that's a whole other thing. The tradition around eclipse worldwide is really, really interesting. So why did early humans come to empirically connect with the moon? Why would they be like making bone fragment, making calendars? Like, what would be the purpose of that? So very simple. Animal migration is influenced by light and darkness. For example, the salmon's migration, it is known that they will hatch on the dark moon. They don't move during full moon because predator. So a lot of the animal behavior is actually related to the cycle of light and darkness. So this is called biological time in the scientific community. So the studies of how salmon migrates during dark nights and how some animal will have the babies at certain time of the year and all of that. That's called biological time. And there's also lunar migration patterns, animal behavior and migration patterns that are closely linked to light and dark lunar activity. So light and dark patterns synchronize animal behavior, which means that if humans understand this, then they can prepare accordingly, which leads to resource management. And resource management may have been one of the first reasons that people started to keep track of the lunar cycle. This here, what we have on the screen is just an example of the Thomson Indian lunar calendar, which is a band of native people from British Columbia. And although this is way more modern, we can speculate that there's similar practice that's been happening forever. And the other thing too is that this calendar is very specific to these people where they are located, which again speaks on the variety of ways that astrology could have risen depending on locality. So the Siberian Chukchi lunar calendar, for example, is completely based on the reindeers. And the lunar time strategy can also be observed. So the reindeer people follow the reindeers, but the reindeers follow the light and dark cycle, and therefore the Chukchi follow the lunar cycle. So their calendar is associated to the biologically cued reindeer. So this is just a sort of parallel to speculate, okay, well, maybe this is why early humans were empirically connecting with the moon, literally to manage resources and to feed themselves. This is the oldest depiction of a fish. It's a salmon, and it's about 1 meter long. And it's in the ceiling of a cave in France. And it's a big sculpture of a male salmon exhausted by spawning. We can see there's like a little hook on his mouth, and that's usually when they are done spawning. That's how it appears. The fish rarely appear in cave painting and prehistoric rock engraving, which is puzzling to many anthropologists because fishing was an important activity during the Ice Age. So again, the Chantal Jegg, which I've shown you at the beginning, the anthropologist that continued the work of Alexander Marshak, she started studying this plaque and realized that it was lit up on the 1st of December. It only gets sunlight at the beginning of December. So the salmon with a hooked or curved mouth is characteristic of the reproductive period in December, which is the precise period the sun enters this particular cave. So we have perhaps a calendar that is linked with the animal cycle and the cycle of the light. We can also see here on the top, there's 13 notches on top of the salmon, and 13 notches, which may indicate the full moon spawning period. This is an intuitive method of lunar counting, and it's 13 from the first crescent moon to the full moon. There is 13 lunation. Again, these are speculation. Again, we see the number 13, which could potentially be from the new moon to the full moon. And this is data about 17,000 years old. Same cave complex in France. So we see this pattern of 13 coming up again. So these cave paintings, until very recently, until the 60s, were thought to be just art that people made because they were bored, or maybe they were having psychedelic experience and telling stories to each other, which is also possible. But more and more with the research is coming to light that this actually may be complex calendars. One of the most famous picture, I'm sure all of you have seen this, Venus de l'Ocel, 25,000 years ago. It's one of the most extraordinary and famous example of this time period. And we see the carving of a voluptuous woman. She has a hand on her stomach, on her belly, and the other one is raised and holding a horn hedged with 13 notches. Again, reminiscent of 12 or 13 new crescent moon contained in a year, perhaps, or the 13 days from the new moon to the full moon. Her face is turned toward the horn, also suggestive of the crescent moon. This gets a little more interesting in terms of, I spoke of resource management and why people would have started keeping track of this lunar cycle, perhaps, and connecting with the moon empirically. But when we see figure like this, we speculate of perhaps a more, something a little bit more religious or mystical happening here. The attribution of meaning to the lunar experience, which we could say is astrology. People were not simply being astronomers, they were also associating meaning, making meaning with their observation of the planets, which, again, a fundamental part of human experience. We have been doing this for a long time. So taken together, the Venus figurine and the calendar bone may be an evidence of a political or astral theology in the management of time that was crucial to the smoothness of societies at that time. This is a really, really cool one. So this is again at the Lascaux cave in France. And there are two bisons. It's a panel representing two bisons leaning against each other, and the tails are intertwined. And the anatomical details, the coat and the erection, indicate that the one on the left is figured in molt, it's molting, and the one on the right is in rut, which corresponds respectively to the beginning of spring and the beginning of autumn. So by measuring with her bearing compass the direction of the two figures, the French researcher Chantal discovered that each bison was oriented towards the sunrise of the season corresponding to the attribute represented. Summer solstice for the bison on the left and winter solstice for the one on the right. As for the point where the two tails are crossing each other, it appears oriented towards the rising sun of the spring and autumn equinox. So when I say this, is the light only hits this part of the cave where the bison is in rut in the spring. And then the light only hits the middle part of the cave when it's spring equinox or autumn equinox. So we may have one of the first complex calendar. And if this is a coincidence, it would be extraordinary. So again, more of the Lascaux cave painting. What if the Lascaux cave painting was actually a map of the sky? And maybe some of you, again, know already this, heard about this, but this is still a controversial topic in the scientific world. But the researcher Chantal goes even further. She said that the people of this period may have drawn a gigantic sky chart, basically. So in fact, this is a sky map that followed the illumination of the cave by the solstice sun. So this is one of the earliest evidence of the existence of a zodiacal constellation, dated about 17,000 years ago. We can see bulls who, until very recently were just thought to be drawings, random drawings of bored cave people. So the Lascaux bull, it's called the Lascaux bull, seems to be part of the Taurus constellation. The eye here would be Aldebaran, and then we would see the Pleiades here on top. And so this potentially could be the oldest depiction that we have of the constellation of Taurus. And you look at it and you're like, yeah, it's obvious. We can even see Orion right here, but highly controversial again, because then we have to reinvent history, and cave people were probably not so stupid after all. And it would also put the awareness of the zodiac and the precession of the equinox to thousands and thousands and thousands of years before Hellenistic Greek time. So the speculation is that the mural was intended to represent the arrangement of what we know as Orion's belt and Taurus the bull and the Pleiades. And is there somehow a direct herd migratory line from this cave painting to the walls of Babylon and into early Western mythology thousands of years later? Because this is almost 20,000 years old. Could this have been the origin of what was practiced in Greek? So here another little example of this breakdown. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it. It seems pretty obvious. So I'm almost done my slides. I'm gonna move quickly through these. Göbekli Tepe, moving in time, 12,000 to 7,000 years ago. Göbekli Tepe was discovered in the 60s. It's not very long ago. But it was dismissed as a medieval cemetery until it was officially discovered in 1994. And it changed everything of what historians thought they knew, because it predates writing and metal tools and even pottery. And it's believed to be the oldest temple in the world. Probably not, though. So its mere experience suggests that religion came before agriculture and not the other way around. So again, we have, every time we make these discoveries, we have to kind of rewrite history, and there's a lot of that happening. It's thought to be an undertaking by hunter-gatherers, and it's built around recognizable physical astronomy and astral theology, and depicts the astrological attitude of megalithic culture. So it's currently dated to 12,000 BCE, which is 7,000 years older than Stonehenge. So there are two major claims that those who think Göbekli Tepe has celestial connection point to. One of the theory, one suggests that the site was aligned with the night sky, particularly the star Sirius, because the local people worship the star like other culture in the region. And then I think the more mainstream theory is that it depicts event, like a meteor event that would have happened maybe even before the temple was built. This is Nabta Playa, which is 5,000 BC. And people were starting to fashion what may be among the world's earliest known astronomical device. These include alignment of stone that may have indicated the rising and setting of certain stars, calendar circles that indicates direction of summer, and solstice sunrise. So those are called megalithic structure, and they're believed to be the oldest in the world, but we seem to be saying that a lot with all of these various structures. This is in Malta, a very old temple with doorways that are aligned to the solstice, winter and summer solstice. It's dated to 4,000 years ago, I believe, but it seems to have been added with time. So it was an ongoing thing. Again, we see culture evolving, gravitating around the observation of the stars. And they're not building these gigantic complex just to do scientific observation, I would assume. They would probably also attribute meaning to these astrological events, i.e. do astrology. So Stonehenge, aligned with the solstice. I'm not going to go in detail with this one because everybody knows Stonehenge. It's only 3,000 years old. We're moving in time, and people see Stonehenge and they see, oh, it's so old. And really, is it that old? Not really. So megalithic structures like this flourish in Western Europe between 4,500 BC and 1,500 BC, from southern Spain to Brittany, Ireland, Western England, Wales, Scotland. They're everywhere. I think there's like 6,000 of them. And I'm not even talking about India, Asia, South America. Here I'm only speaking of a little bit of the Western world. There's writing about Stonehenge in the Greek historian Diodorus of Sicily. He talks about the solar religions of the Druids of that period. So more of that. Yeah, estimated to be 900 of these, not counting all the wood structures which have been lost. Again, I'm showing these because I want to just reiterate that people have observed planetary motion and contextualized their existence on Earth with astrology, doing astronomy and astrology forever. It's a fundamental part of our experience. This is in Peru, and it's 3,500 years old. It's called, it's pre-Columbian. And the orientation of the main build structures seem to be related to the southernmost position of moonrise on the horizon, the June solstice sunrise, and the rising of certain stars such as Sirius and the Southern Cross. This would be the earliest example in the America of a close relationship between land and sky. Again, I'm sure there's older stuff, but this is sort of more mainstream. And then we arrived to Mesopotamia, and really the beginning of more complex writing about astronomical event. So the earliest evidence of a tradition of astrology as highly organized and codified system as this is in Sumer, southern Iraq, around 2000 years. And we start to find recorded evidence for the use of mundane astrology in the affairs of the state. But this is recorded evidence. So, but we can see that it's a cumulative process. This is speculated to be an astronomical instrument with the Pleiades potentially. It's called the Nebraskae disk. It's about 30 centimeter, and it was discovered in Germany in 1999. And it seems to be a random groups of dots, but it may include the Pleiades here. This is what's speculated. And it's speculated to be a horizon marker because of the two long crescent shape on each side here. That would be used to observe the sun's passage from dimmest, coldest extreme to brightest and hottest, and to magically participate in both. These is probably my favorite artifacts, the golden hats. They were all found at different locations. And these are very rare artifact from Bronze Age Europe. One was found in Switzerland, one was found in Germany, one was found in France, and they're dated from 100 years apart. The objects are made of thin sheet gold and are decorated with astronomical symbols that are believed to be of Celtic origin. The surface of the tall one, the tallest one, is adorned with 1,739 sun symbols and half moons. And it matches perfectly the Metonic cycle. So it's speculated that these golden hats serve as religious insignia for king priests that would have been regarded as lords of time, who had access to a divine knowledge that enabled them to look into the future. Sign me up. I want that job. Julius Caesar said that the Druids, Julius Caesar said of the Druids that they had much to say about the heavenly bodies and their movement. So that's actually written from that time. Then we have very, very complex. I mean, the first example of written records that we have are actually almond-based astrology tablets. And these are a compilation. They're called the Enuma Anu Enil, and there's about 7,000 omen clay tablets. So the gods or planets who spoke to humanity through omens were used as regular reports that were sent to the king. So we see again here that this is not just astronomical observation, but people are contextualizing their experience, and they're trying to, I guess there's like a more mystical sort of underlying religious experience associated with the astronomy. And then we have the Vedas, which are dated to about 2,000 years ago also, but probably much older, and they're sacred texts in India. And the diffusion from India to Central Asia and China might also have had possible reciprocal influence of India onto Mesopotamia. And we're getting into the written history of astrology, and then we see here more Egyptian things, the decans, and this is not as old, but astrology played a significant religious role in Egypt, and I'm not getting too much into that. And then the first example of a birth chart that we have, dated from 400 years ago. There's about 28 birth chart that survive from the Mesopotamian tradition. And I'm stopping here for that. We can see here, I'm jumping a little bit, not Western Europe, but the turtle shell calendar from, this is from the Cherokee calendar, but the Anishinaabe and a lot of different nations have turtle shell calendar system, and which fits perfectly again with the lunar cycle. So this is a whole other tradition. I didn't go down that pathway too much, but I wanted to mention it because this has been a tradition for who knows how long here in North America. So many First Nation teaching, including those of the Anishinaabe people, use the back of a turtle as a lunar calendar. And then an example of a beautiful star map from the Skidi Pane. They're from the Plain, Nebraska region. And they had like a very complex celestial religion and one of the most sophisticated kind in North America. So another example, I love the stars here with the hide. So they were considered one of the best sky watchers of ancient time. The Pane tribes, especially interested in the gods of the sky, parallel to Mesopotamia. So among them, there were astronomers who watched the movement of the planet, particularly venerated the North Star as a beneficent creator god, and went in strong fear of the magical South Star, a force of opposition belonging to the underworld. This is Canada's Stonehenge, and I couldn't find many pictures of that, but it was considered to be a medicine wheel, but there's 28 spokes. So again, we find the number 28. This is in, I believe, Alberta. It's found in Alberta, and yeah, dated from about 5,000 years old. There's not much information, but the tribes culturally to this day use this place as a sort of mystical place, and there's oral tradition around it, but not too much information, obviously. So I'm done my little tour. I just came across this morning, actually. This is going to be taking place, I think it's with Skyscape Gate, I believe. Anyway, I can put the link in the chat box after, but there's going to be this amazing cultural astronomy event happening. It already started February 22nd, and it looks like it goes until June 14. I didn't really have time to look too much into it, but it looks like very interesting, particularly for the more native approach to astronomical events and cultural astronomy from these perspectives. So I wanted to put it there. And like I said, I can put the link in the chat box because it looks really interesting. Cosmological myth of Neolithic petroglyph, northwestern Russia, and then Colombia. So yeah, looks very cool. And that is what I had for you guys. I would like to open the conversation a little bit, just in regards to the way we do astrology now, the place that astrology has in our culture right now. And I think that I want us to be stewards of these tradition as we move forward. I want us to remember our connection with the light and these cycles, because I think that as we progress forward, it's going to become more and more diluted. And yeah, I want to hear, I'm curious to hear if anybody has an opinion about that, if we can open the conversation.
Yeah, the chat box is open, so you can type into the chat box, and Elodie, you can see it, can't you?
Yeah, perfect. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the UMAP medicine will. Yeah, I guess my whole point of kind of exploring the landscape was really to reflect on what it is that we're doing today, because although having technique and having really complex means of prediction as astrologer, are we not in the danger of doing something completely abstract and kind of disconnected from our human experience, from the experience of nature? Again, I don't want to be negative with this. I think we have a natural progression. This is where things are heading. I don't think necessarily it's good or bad. But as an astrologer, and astrology being the science of light, what are the implications if our eyes are constantly exposed to light? And if nobody has anything to say, that's okay too. I just wanted to kind of open the space to have commentaries or dialogue about that.
Yeah, while we wait for some comments, maybe I can chime in a little bit. I loved your rant, Elodie. That was actually great. I think what I'm taking away is the somatic experience you talked about, so important. And so I really appreciate that. And it's kind of mind-blowing to think of that short time in history that we are experiencing artificial light. That's a wonderful reminder for us modern human beings. Okay, some of our listeners are giving some comments here in the chat box.
Yeah, sleep issues. Yeah, and I make an effort at practicing myself this in the morning. I have actually a timer. I'm not using my phone. Supposedly going outside, having natural daylight hit your eyes, and putting your phone down before your sleep time, just to keep the natural circadian cycle going. I think that's definitely something that I'm practicing. Sleeping is difficult for almost everyone I know. Yeah, exactly. And I think the anxiety that technology creates, I think that's one component, but I think also not just the exposure of light into our eyes and our use of that. And then more extensively, I think we are also disembodied. Like today, if we were in a room together, we might like get up and like move our body a little bit and like shake hands and have tea. But now we're just completely disembodied and in our head still. Yeah, so many people not able to see the sky. Absolutely. Yeah.
There's also the fact that there is, in some countries, there is actually advertisements are projected onto the night sky, which made my soul cry just a little bit.
Yeah, and that's a whole, and I don't want us to be resistant, because if we're resistant to our experience, then we're actually avoiding reality. That's the reality, and it might not necessarily be in the long run. That's just what's happening. But I do think that as astrologer, we can be more deliberate about our understanding and our practice of what it is that we do. Because astrology is becoming so abstract. It's like, I'm thinking of the younger generation who are online every day getting a million sort of transit notification, and they're not even tuning in to how do they feel in their body. the astrology is telling them this, so therefore it's filtering their experience. So we have this dissociation from the body. That's why I was talking about somatic, like, because our practice of astrology always was somatic, more somatic. I mean, I'm making assumption here, but we were participating in the natural world until very recently. I think that we take for granted the creative process in those ancient artwork. I feel we assume art making is spawned from religious thought, when I would argue it's the other way around. So to your point with intuition, astrologers should be open to their own critical thinking and not get caught up in the noise. Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I agree with that. Absolutely. I had no idea about archeo-astrology. The examples are mind-blowing. Thank you. You enjoyed the lecture. Awesome. Somatic yoga, concentrating on the body parts ruled by the moon phase, as well as Qigong, which helps me to incorporate the element and to remember that humans are the conduit between heaven and earth. Beautiful. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The first astrologers, astronomer were women recording lunar cycle because of menstrual period are at the same length of the lunar cycle and often track exactly with the moon. It would be very important to a woman to keep track of the moon to know where she became pregnant and when she could expect to give birth. Yes, one of the first bone that I showed, like I think it was the baboon tibia, is actually speculated to have been produced by women for that purpose. And I didn't go into detail too much of each because honestly, this week, as I was like trying to synthesize my ideas, I was getting constantly lured in so many directions because I'm trying to cover 200,000 years in like a short period of time, and everything is absolutely fascinating. But that's why also I was directing towards this conference that seems to be happening through Sophia Center, because there's going to be a lot more in the coming weeks on the topic. So we also have, I believe, 12 dark sky reserves in the world, including one recently designated in Wales. Oh, that's amazing. I didn't know that. How can we reconnect to nature and observe the cycles? I have heard of dark sky movement. Is disembodiment dissociation or future? Can we stop it? Yeah, I don't want to have this attitude of fear. I think because we are born of this time, we're made for this time. So I don't think necessarily, it's helpful to resist it. But I think because we are participating in it, what we can do is actually be more conscious of our usage of electricity and light and our relationship with light. And that's what I started doing personally, just like putting my phone down, at 8 p.m. in the evening, because it's really compulsive. It's just like you're constantly scrolling, and in the morning with the coffee, you just start your day and you're just like scrolling. So really being deliberate about these small adjustments. I think the younger generation too are resisting a little bit the cell phone. Like a friend was saying that her son wanted her Walkman. Like he was like, I don't want all these options. I don't want my phone. I just want to listen to music. So I think we have to trust that our natural humanness will pervade to a certain extent. So many good comments. Yeah, the Taurus and Pleiades seem to be very predominant. Is it because it was the most noticeable? It's very beautiful. If you haven't seen it in the summer, couple of summers ago here, I took a picture of Venus next to it, and it was really nice. There's a lot of mythology associated with the Pleiades. For those who are not familiar, astrological magic also, it's a very particular part of the sky, but that's a whole other story. but I think humans have been engaging. There's a lot of mythology around that part of the sky. Some part of the sky are more spirited than other. Connection between the depiction of Pleiades and Orion and the legend of extraterrestrial from those constellations. Yeah, I have read stuff about that. Yeah, the Pleiades are so fascinating. Isn't it crazy that like we might have a depiction of Taurus the bull in a cave from 20,000 years ago, which puts the zodiac so far, so much further. Yeah, instinction. Yeah, practice. There's a lot of comments there.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of comments. People are sharing all kinds of scientific studies also that have to do with the effect of light on artificial light, on insects, on the menstruation cycle. So about technology addiction as well. Yes, because there's also something with moving images on a screen always attract the attention. And it's kind of impossible not to look at it, not to focus on it. So there's a part of the addiction coming in as well.
Yeah. Do you think that Byzantium and the cave in France will be one day connected to astrology? Are there currently work being done on that? Yeah, there's work being done on that, mostly by this French researcher I showed you at the beginning. Her work is unfortunately only in French, but I think that the Lascaux cave painting are being deciphered now. Like as we speak, I think we're progressing towards like a much further understanding of what they represent. I also compiled together a small reference PDF that I don't know if anybody's interested. I could potentially just put my email in the chat box. Anybody that wants, it's just one sheet reference, but it's all the resources I use to build this lecture, so that if you actually want to do your own research, you can go directly to these links. Just, it's not too expensive, but because there's a lot of information online, but you have to be able to look to find it. So yeah, if anybody is interested, you can just email me and I'll send you the PDF with the links.
All right, where can you, well, let me take a look at your website, perhaps. Is that where people can contact you as well?
I think just put in my email. Is what is my email? Sorry, I'm always using my personal email. You can look on my website, there's contact there. It's just that I haven't updated since 2015, so it's a little bit archaic. Not as archaic as the Lascaux cave painting, but almost.
Right. Okay. This was fascinating, Elodie. If you don't mind, I will stop the screen share.
Yes, sorry. Yeah, here we go.
No
Perfect.
trouble. And yeah, before we go, I just want to thank everyone for your questions and participation. And let me just show you where you can find more information about Elodie's work. So let me just share my screen here. There we go. This
oh yeah, there's contact me. You can contact me there. I see in the corner.
Right.
Yeah, there you go.
Contact Elodie, and then you can ask any other questions now if you didn't get a chance today. And then I just want to take everybody back to the nightlightastrology.com website. Tomorrow, probably you will be able to see where register now is. That will be a replay button. And I want to say that next week, we're going to talk with Catherine Urban about solar returns and annual perfections. And I hope to see you all there. In any case, this is on Saturday, March the 25th, the same time as today at 12 p.m. Eastern time. And I wish everybody a wonderful, wonderful Sunday. And I hope you enjoyed this first talk of our series, and hope to see you next week. Thank you so much, Elodie, for this fascinating
Thank you,
webinar.
Michelle, and thank you everybody for being there. Thanks a lot.
All right. Bye, everyone. Thank you.